Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at our quarterly Corruption Prevention and Integrity Insights Forum. I'm David Wolfe, a Deputy Commissioner here at IBAC, and I'm pleased to be facilitating this event for you today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands we're all on as we meet today. I'm speaking to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and extend my respects to members of the Aboriginal communities attending with us. It's fantastic that so many of you could join us for today's webinar. We've received over 550 registrations representing agencies from across all parts of metropolitan and regional Victoria, and we welcome a large cohort from the various interstate agencies as well. And a special welcome to those of you joining us from our partner agencies within the Victorian Integrity System. That's the Local Government Inspectorate, the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner, the Victorian Ombudsman and the Victorian Inspectorate. Well, today's forum is all about building and maintaining a speak-up culture, which is absolutely critical in developing a corruption-resistant workplace. And we know through feedback that this theme is something that many people are interested in. We know that implementing and embedding integrity systems into your organisations is not an easy or quick project, and we hope that today's forum offers you some practical strategies to improve the integrity culture. And we're lucky to be joined today by three speakers from across the VPS and local government who will share with us their insights and strategies around this topic. In a short while, you'll hear from Emily Howe, General Counsel and Director of Dispute Resolution at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. Also hear from Dr. Graham Emerson, who's the Deputy Secretary of Corporate Services at the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And finally from Leanne Wabegner, who's the Executive Manager of People and Safety at the City of Monash. And we certainly appreciate the time that they have taken to be with us today, and we very much look forward to their insights. I'll just cover off some housekeeping for the event. There will be an opportunity to ask questions during the audience Q&A session in the second half of this webinar. So I encourage you to submit any comments and questions you have throughout today's event by using the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screens. As this webinar is only 45 minutes, we will continue the conversation after the event by sending you any relevant resources and answering questions we were not able to get to. And please note, of course, we're not able to answer questions about ongoing investigations. Recording of the forum will be made available on the IBAC website in the coming weeks, and we'll also share the presentation slides. If you would like to turn on live captions, you can do so by clicking on the live closed captions and the media controls at the bottom of your desktop, or if you're using a mobile device by clicking on settings in the Zoom app and tapping on the closed caption option. If you experience any technical difficulties, please ensure you've downloaded the latest version of Zoom. We hope that you'll take away some useful insights and learnings from today's forum. As a brief introduction to this topic, an organisation culture of integrity that genuinely supports and encourages people to speak up is vitally important in exposing and ultimately preventing public sector corruption. We know that corruption thrives when it's not called out or when witnesses look the other way or it's swept under the carpet. So when viewed holistically, corruption is properly seen as not just about individual failure, but as a reflection on an organisation's overall integrity and culture. And we know that building a speak-up culture is challenging. Even here at IBAC, we are continually learning and working on improving our own culture through workshops, strengthening systems and processes, ensuring consistently strong leadership and other ongoing activities to build trust and staff confidence to raise issues. We recognise it isn't easy, and our presenters today will share some of their own strategies and perspectives on what has worked for them and their organisations. So now for our first presentation today. Emily Howe is General Counsel and Director of Dispute Resolution at the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. She's a lawyer and advocate and was previously a legal director at the Human Rights Law Centre. Emily will be speaking to us about the culture at the Commission and some of the tools and strategies they use internally to build a speak-up culture. Please welcome Emily Howe.
Thanks, David. Thanks for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present and to Aboriginal people in attendance today. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today I want to speak really briefly about the work we do on Speak Up culture at the Commission. We promote Speak Up cultures through our service delivery and also work on it internally. I'd like to share some of that with you. First up, I'll give you a sense of what the Commission does. Then I'll discuss the barriers that we know that exist to speaking up. And finally, I'd like to run through some strategies that I think leaders and bystanders can use to encourage that speak up culture. So the first slide, please. Just want to explain the frame that I'm coming from, which is the regulator of the issues on the left-hand side of your screen. We are concerned about behaviours where all the evidence shows that victim survivors really struggle to speak up and to report what's happening or what's happened to them. And so we understand the importance of speaking up from the perspective of our service delivery, our dispute resolution team accept reports from people who have been victim survivors of sexual harassment and discrimination. We know what a big step it is for that person to come to us, and we know how many more don't have the wherewithal to do the same. We also benefit, and our functions are on the right-hand side of this slide, we also benefit in our reviews and investigations work from the people who share with us their experiences in the workplace of inappropriate or unlawful conduct. And we issue guidelines, so guidelines on the Equal Opportunity Act that address things such as how to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, a key plank of which is building a speak up culture. And finally, our education team actually provides terrific education on how bystanders can be part of that work, and I'll come back to that a bit later. So next slide, please. These are just the barriers to speaking up, none of which are new and are probably well known to you all today. For the person affected by the unlawful behaviour, these barriers are often overwhelming. And in fact, Kate Jenkins, in her Respect at Work report, really highlighted the need to move away from relying on people who've been affected by the unlawful behaviour to actually raise the report and make the change or get the address that's needed. And that's the reason why today I'm going to speak about what leaders and bystanders can do to create that speak up culture, rather than how complainants themselves can speak up. Okay, so the next slide is about leadership, which is just absolutely crucial to building a speak up culture. Leaders at all levels can model respectful behaviour. So this is about setting the tone in your treatment of others and being intentional about that as the standard that you want to set. This is the email before the work Christmas party that sets out what the expectations are of behaviour there. And those kind of expectations should be communicated and very transparent through all your policies and processes, induction, training, codes of conduct, performance plans. This communication needs to be ongoing, and sometimes, you know, the triggers for that kind of communication can be things like incidents that have been reported and resolved, or the reporting back to staff from the People Matters survey. It's absolutely vital that leaders support complainants from victimisation through a fair and confidential reporting and complaints procedure. And this is about prioritising the well-being of the victim survivor in the process. Importantly, this approach can be adopted whilst also providing procedural fairness for all parties to the dispute. Leaders should encourage bystanders, and I've got the next slide on bystanders, so I'll come back to that. Sorry, just the last point on the leader slide is how important it is for leaders to call out the inappropriate conduct when you see it. This protects the target of the behaviour, it communicates that the behaviour isn't okay, and it discourages the behaviour from happening again. Now to bystanders. Bystanders are the people, that's the next slide, please. Bystanders are the people who witness inappropriate and unlawful conduct. So it's you and your colleagues in the workplace. Bystander intervention can look like a worker diffusing a situation, stepping in to say that a sexist or racist joke isn't funny, or helping a person who's actually experiencing that behaviour to get away from the harasser or to otherwise get help. It's really important that this is more than just people who educate themselves about right or wrong in the workplace. Bystanders actually take action and look after the people around them and consider their safety and well-being. Bystanders can influence and challenge behaviour standards in the workplace in much the same way that leaders can do, because we can all set the tone and expectations of what the standard of behaviour is, and we can all respond to inappropriate behaviour. Although there are some caveats to that, of course. We have to encourage bystanders to act safely and create that space that is critical to building a positive and equitable workplace culture. There is the potential for backlash, for isolation of people who speak up, and that's why workplaces need to have systems and resources that actually assist bystanders. So we would say it's no longer enough to have a harassment policy or your equal opportunity policy that just only looks to protect complainants and respondents when reports are made. The organisation really needs to ask, what are you going to do to protect bystanders? If you want them to act, then the organisation needs to show how they can do it and assure them about how they're going to be protected. The Commission's education team runs really terrific bystander training, and that provides bystanders with a really good understanding of how to model appropriate behaviour, but also the tools for how to intervene and respond safely when inappropriate behaviour occurs. So my final slide is really about putting an intersectional lens on this topic. The barriers to reporting that I mentioned before are often greater for people with particular types of lived experience. So, for example, sexual harassment disproportionately impacts on Aboriginal people, LGBTI people, and people with disability. So, it's really those harmful attitudes and stereotypes that drive the behaviour in the first place that also make it harder for people to then speak up. And that's part of the reason why the Commission has created the groups on the screen. We have the Deadly Yarns group with our Aboriginal employees, the People of Colour Network, Pride, which is the LGBTI group, and we're just building a disability group. And the idea is that by having a group forum, it provides that support of peers to raise issues in a safer way. And the Commissioner goes to these network meetings and hears directly from people. It's nascent, and it'd be great to report back on how these are going in a year's time, but it's something that we're proud of doing at the Commission. So I'll finish there, but thank you so much, David, for the opportunity to present some of the Commission's work. And I really look forward to hearing the other speakers and getting into questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emily. That's quite a concise presentation, but some really powerful messages in there. I can see plenty of questions coming through. Keep them coming through in the chat function. We'll get to those once we have finished our next two speakers. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Graham Emerson, who's the Deputy Secretary of Corporate Services at DELP. Graham has responsibility at DELP for the delivery of people and culture, finance, strategy, performance, legal, governance, and a whole lot more. It's a very busy portfolio. He's held executive roles in a number of spaces in local government and is a very experienced administrator. Graham will be talking about DELP's approach to culture with integrity as well. So Graham, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner David, and thank you for the opportunity to share some of DELP's insights into how we've been approaching trying to build a stronger culture of integrity, and obviously Speak Up is a key component of that. So I'll today really touch on three aspects. I'll touch on the importance of having a strategic approach, a very deliberate approach to building integrity as the organisation's key foundation. I'll talk about some of the challenges that we've experienced in terms of building a Speak Up culture, and I'll finish by talking about picking up on some of Emily's comments around leadership and just how important it is for that tone setting for leaders at all levels of the organisation in building a strong culture around integrity. I'd like to start though, of course, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that I'm meeting from today. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Just a little bit of context, DELP is a department that's made up of about 5,500 people. We're spread right across the state. We work from 80 odd different work locations, and that's everything from central CBD right through to very remote locations right across the state. So I just say that because I will touch on some of the challenges that represent in being such a diverse and dispersed organisation as well. The first thing I would say though is that a strong culture of integrity just doesn't occur in its own right. It really does take a very deliberate and coordinated effort on behalf of the entire organisation, its leaders, and it is a responsibility of all staff. And so having a really deliberate strategy and framework that sets the expectations from our experiences has been really important. We established a dedicated integrity unit in 2019, and one of the first tasks of that unit was really to refresh our framework to make sure it was contemporary, and that it was going to be leading edge, and most importantly though, that it was going to make a difference. To complement that, we also developed a new strategy to complement that framework, and that was all about reorientating our efforts to build an integrity culture to one of promoting a shift to a more principles-based approach to both integrity understanding, but also the management of all aspects of integrity across the department. So it really, that strategy and the framework was all about giving greater meaning to how staff can put it into practice, what behaviours are expected. It sets the framework as to why integrity culture is important, and really does call out the need for us to call out improper conduct. So having that broader strategic framework and strategy has really positioned us to drive a number of key initiatives across the department. Just a bit of evidence, I suppose, since 2019, we've seen a 7% increase in our staff who acknowledge that the department has actually improved its overall organisational integrity over that 3-year period. So it's up from 73%, so up to 80%, which whilst they're small gains, they are really positive gains, and we attribute a lot of that to the fact that we actually set out a very clear framework and strategy. We're now into the second iteration, if I can go to the next slide, of our integrity strategy, and I'm not going to touch too much on the detail here other than to say we've identified 5 key priority areas that we want to focus on over the next 3 years. And for the purposes of today's forum, I would highlight that the 5th of those priority areas, and they're not in priority order, is about building and supporting a safe speak up environment. So you can see from that the whole aspect of having a safe speak up environment is a really central piece of our strategy to build an overall integrity culture. We've still got some way to go. So if I can go on to the next slide, which is about some of the challenges that we experience in trying to promote that broader integrity culture, and particularly a safe speak up environment. I touched on the fact that we've got a large and very diverse and in a lot of respects a regionally based workforce, so CBD right through to very remote regional areas. And that does present quite a significant challenge for us in reaching out to staff at all levels and in all locations that resonates with them. Obviously, you know, what might resonate for people in an office-based environment in the CBD is going to be very, very different to field-based staff in very remote locations. So one of our challenges is actually about getting cut-through messages in a way that can actually resonate with our broad and varied workforce. And that's still work in progress for us, but we're really cognizant of it, that a one size fits all in getting cut through, given the variety of work that the department does, is a really key challenge for us. One of the key aspects are, you know, quite operational, but I would call out over the last, you know, 2 years of the COVID-19 context, the ability for us to really drive hard in training and engagement opportunities with staff has been challenging when we know that face-to-face training for this behavioural type aspects of awareness raising has been much greater. The challenges for getting cut through in that environment is much greater when we're online compared to when we're doing face-to-face training. So we've had to adapt and be quite agile about how we keep a visible presence and keep that level of training and engagement at the level that we need to ensure that issues around integrity just don't drop off. And that probably takes me to the next major challenge that I would call out, and that is about getting crowded out. As a department that has a really significant at place-based environment, we've had a number of really significant major natural events, everything from major bushfire event in 2019-20. We've had some really significant storms, floods, COVID. We've essentially been operating in a crisis type environment since, you know, late 2019, and that often means it's really hard, and the messages about integrity often get crowded out because of the crisis management type environment. So again, we've had to work really hard in terms of ensuring that the messages around integrity don't continue to get lost in that crowded out type environment. So how have we gone about trying to build a speak up culture at DELP? One of the really key things is, if I can perhaps go on to the next slide. One of the really key things is to have a message that's really simple and that can stick, and one that you can continue to repeat. And for us, it's a pretty simple message, and that is, if something doesn't look right or you're not sure, speak up. And that's a bit of a catch line that we're trying to utilize as a bit of a brand. It's a really simple message, and our experience is that it actually does cut through. If it doesn't look or feel right, or if you're not sure about it, you should say something. The other key thing we've done is we've really taken a very strong disclosure-focused approach. So taking reports seriously, managing the expectations of disclosures, being really clear about those expectations, confidentiality at every turn where we can, and building those foundations for supporting Speak Up means that other people pass on word of mouth based on their experiences. And that's a key initiative that we're trying to, I suppose, instill, is that if our disclosures have a positive experience, they're more likely to talk about it to their peers. They're more likely to encourage a speak up culture. We've taken very much a no wrong door policy, and that means a number of our subject matter experts across the department have an open environment to share knowledge, and therefore we can actually make linkages and in turn really get to sort of hotspot areas and focus on those for encouraging speak up. We've got a number of alternative reporting channels, whether it's their managers, whether it's the integrity unit, whether it's our workplace investigations unit or whatever. So having multiple channels for people to encourage them to use the channel that is safe for them. And the other thing is that we've got different methods for people to be able to disclose, whether that's in person, whether it's email, whether it's phone. We have a dedicated public interest disclosure hotline as well. We do a number of information and awareness campaigns, whether it's built around Fraud Awareness Week, Anti-Corruption Day, World Whistleblowers Day, etc. We've built a very specific integrity component into our orientation for all new starters, and that's had some really strong feedback and cut through as well. So the last thing I'd really just wanted to touch on, and Emily's probably covered this very neatly already, but that is the importance of leadership. If I can go to my next slide. It's really important that we take every opportunity to keep integrity top of mind. Integrity is not a value or a behaviour that we can just set aside at the end of the workday. It becomes easier to meet our special public sector expectations when we practice it, when we live it, when we talk about it, and when we, particularly as leaders, take action when something is not right. And I'd be very happy to expand further on the importance of leadership in the tone setting, to use Emily's words again, and its importance for building an integrity culture. So David, that's probably enough for me. Hopefully that gives some insights into how DELP is approaching building that integrity culture, but also a key component of that, building a safe speak up culture.
Fantastic. Thanks, Graham. That was a terrific presentation. There was a lot of material in there and some great takeaways for our audience. One of the key things that struck me is that your department, in a resource-constrained environment with plenty of other crises in place, has still found it important to invest in integrity building for the organisation. And as I say, that's very encouraging. Okay, I'd like to move on to our final speaker. That is Leanne Lebegna from City of Monash. Leanne has had a long-standing career as a People and Culture Senior Leader and is currently the Executive Manager of People and Safety at the City of Monash. Leanne's got a diverse background, having worked across a range of industries, including telecommunications, health and water. She's committed to organisational development theory and embedded sustainable change across people and culture practices. Leanne will be speaking to us today about the many ingredients of an effective speak-up culture and what the City of Monash is doing around behavioural change. Please welcome Leanne.
Thanks, David, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be able to present and share just what's happening with us at Monash. But just before I do, I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands that we're meeting today and recognising their continuing connection to the land and waterways, and I respect their elders past, present and emerging, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. I actually wanted to just draw out that there's lots of themes that will come through at the finalisation of my presentation, and leadership is certainly one of them. In terms of Monash, we are obviously a local government authority, and we have over 100 services that we provide to the community, and we do that a bit like DELP and some of the other agencies here today, with limited resources, and we have about 1,200 people in our headcount. So I'll move quickly on to the next slide in terms of my focus. So the focus, slightly different lens in that I'm actually coming from an organisational development behavioural lens, if you like. I like to call a speak-up culture speakability, because to me it is actually about not just culture, but the ability to speak up. So that's kind of a bit of a phrase that I like to use. I'll be talking a little bit about the alignment of the organisation and behavioural change and the importance of psychological safety. It's been extraordinarily topical of late, psychological safety with COVID, and more topical, of course, with the psychosocial regulations being up for proposal with WorkSafe. So I'm happy to move to the next slide. It's a bit of a no-brainer, but what I just wanted to point out is often when I come into organisations, and not specifically Monash, but any organisation, it's been some time before there's an audit done on just how policies, processes, frameworks, structures, values, behaviours are aligned and how they interact. So when you've got your cultural aspiration, or you're wanting to build a culture of speak up, for example, what are the policies and the processes that are absolutely supporting that, or in fact blocking that? And I've seen plenty of examples. Trust, for example, in terms of value set, where policies particularly don't necessarily lend themselves to that. So it's a bit of a starting place. Make sure that where you have policies and procedures being developed, that you're getting that consultation across the organisation with your people, and making sure that there's alignment across the actual frameworks. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but it is a bit of a 101, and it is a bit of a trap that we don't go back and revisit these things. And often, we think that they're the only things that do work for us, and it's so much more than that. So if we move on to the next slide, I wanted to touch on psychological safety, particularly the work of Amy Edmondson, who's a Harvard professor and who coined psychological safety after some significant research. And I think it's really important that we underpin the way we're supporting a speak up culture is to actually make sure that we're looking at psychological safety, because we hear time and time again through focus groups, through employee feedback, that people don't feel psychologically safe to speak up. It doesn't matter. You might have all the frameworks in place, but they need to have that psychological safety to actually be able to speak up. So just in terms of definition, the definition that we're seeing is really around not being punished or humiliated when speaking up. And this was originally set out to improve innovation and inclusion, but it also applies for speak up when it comes to corruption, fraud, and anything for that matter. And I think we've heard from the speakers that leaders do set the tone. And I really like the show the way or get in the way. And that's something that we've been working on quite significantly from a leadership perspective. One of the traits that we're focusing on as part of our development for leaders is curiosity, but we're also focusing on courage. And courage is a really important part of the psychological safety relationship, as is trust. And how does that lend itself to banish fear? And what are the things that we're doing to create feedback loops and grievance approaches where people can actually raise grievances or report grievances, and embed structures that cater for difference? We've actually learnt that one size does not fit all. We were really proud of a grievance framework or a speak up framework that we put in place. And when we did the consultation on that framework, what we heard really loud and clear was, that's great, but if you don't feel safe, it's not going to work. So we've had to do a whole lot more consultation around that. So that's been a really important learning for us. And I think the other thing around psychological safety is also transparency of mistakes. It's something that can be really quite a hinder to psychological safety if we don't allow for or celebrate experiments and learning and the making of mistakes. So that's a really important mention that I thought would be worth bringing to the table. So just to unpack psychological safety a little bit more, we'll move to the next slide. I'm actually using one framework. There are a number of them. I'm using a framework that was developed by a particular theorist, Timothy Clark. And as I said, there are a number of them. This one, it's quite simple. I think the key for this is that the quadrants of psychological safety are successive in their nature, so you can't really have one without the other. And what I wanted to do was point out challenger safety. So the way this model works is challenger safety actually sits up really high if you think about the actual model in terms of respect and permission. And without those things, you're not going to have a culture of challenger safety. And I'm drawing your attention to that one particularly because that is where we actually see the speaking up culture. People are able to express their ideas, identify changes, expose problems, and also expose issues like corruption or fraud. And I think one of the things that we've done that's been quite significant culturally for our organisation is we've changed safety to be less about compliance, but more around what does it mean what's a safety culture look like? What does it mean? So we talk about physical safety, but we're talking a whole lot more now about psychological safety. And we know, that we're also going to be talking about psychosocial safety and psychosocial health. And that lends itself to the building of trust and integrity. Some of the things that we've done have included, and I'm just conscious of time, but I'll run through a couple of things. We've done bystander training, and that's been done in support of and in partnership with organisations like Vereoc. We've also got Raise It champions. So we've moved away from contact officers. We've moved away from some traditional approaches to the way people can actually put their hand up and talk to different people. The Raise It champions extend across a range of topics. Might be, discrimination. It might be fraud. It could be just something that people are not comfortable about. And we've got Raise It champions across the organisation. We've got a ways to go with that. And we're also got a ways to go with our bystander training, particularly in terms of supporting bystanders. And we heard already from our panellists around that one. So that's some of the work that we're doing, and we've got a range of frameworks that support it. But as I said, what we're learning is those frameworks are not about one size fits all. And I'm going back to that first slide, and that first slide was very much about processes, frameworks, and aligning them to values and behaviours and our strategies. But we have to constantly review them. We have to constantly get the check-ins with our employees around, are these working? Are they doing what they're intended to do? And it's being developed from the ground up. And that's a really important part of the work that we're doing. There's lots of complexities with the model of psychological safety, and I'm really comfortable with sharing some more material with you all. And I'm conscious of making sure that we have got question time. But that's pretty much what I wanted to touch on, in that we culturally are trying to embed different mindsets and behaviours around this piece that actually is about speakability, and speakability for anything, whether or not that's actually something that is directly related to fraud or corruption, or whether it's related to someone feeling discriminated against, sexual harassment, bullying. And that's been really important for us as a overall holistic approach to speakability and a speak up culture. So I'm going to leave it at that, David, because I have sped up just a little bit, conscious of the time, and really happy to share more. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Terrific. Thanks, Leanne. That was a terrific presentation. You struck me with speakability at the start, but then you impressed me with the rest of the presentation. We've come to the question and answer part of the forum today. We're a bit aspirational in terms of timing, and we've gone into our Q&A period as we normally and generally do, but we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Normally I would say keep submitting questions, but we have so many. I think we've got plenty of material that we can work with and we'll respond to. The first question I have, it comes from the audience, is around bystander protection. And maybe I'll throw to Emily and Leanne to answer this, about what would bystander protection look like, and if you've got any practical examples of that. Emily?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's bystander protection needs to think about what a person who's in that situation needs to know to be and feel safe. And so I think it's about having the policies that are transparent, that say to that bystander, if you speak up, we will keep it confidential. We will provide you with this support. We have these protections from you being victimised. I think it's also about, even before that, in a preventative way, training people to be bystanders. And obviously Leanne's got great expertise in this. The key thing is that bystanders can do this safely. And we know that there are repercussions for people at times who speak out. So it's really important that people are trained in how to be safe in the moment, but also that they know that they can rely on the systems that the organisation has in place, that's already thought about how they're going to care for them, give them exactly the same things, like support services that they might need as they go through this process again. Leanne, did you have more to add?
Look, I would just personally say that absolutely agree with all of that. And again, I'm going to come back to the one size doesn't fit all. We'll have some generic bystander support mechanisms, for example, anonymity, confidentiality, and sometimes that can't always work. But the first question we would ask is, what will make you feel safe and what's important to you, and how do we actually make sure that individual, based on what's important to them, that we can respond to that. And there's a whole range of ways that we could, but it's really important in terms of that individualisation.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Next question I'll pitch to Graham. Graham, often what we see in our investigations is there's a disconnect between the senior leadership's understanding of their speak up culture and the one that exists within the operations and the staff of the organisation. Have you got some thoughts about how you identify that gap and then how to address it?
Yeah, thanks, David. It's a perennial challenge, I think, for any organisation, for leaders to get an unfiltered view of really what is happening. Very often, leaders get quite a cleansed view on the way through of messages. So for me, it's about leaders genuinely being engaged with people, and that's across multiple, taking multiple opportunities, multiple mediums to really get in touch with the organisation and where its temperature's at. We our secretary recently has done a series of listen and learn opportunities where, an unfiltered opportunity to sit down with a range of staff in a very safe environment to really understand, what is at the essence of some of the issues, including around integrity. So it's a genuine curiosity. It's a genuine creating a safe environment to listen to what the organisation is telling us. It is a challenge. I'm not suggesting for a moment this is an easy fix, but we really, as leaders, need to take every opportunity possible to tap into and open our ears with genuine curiosity to what's actually happening on the ground. And dialogue is a really powerful opportunity in that space.
Thanks, Graham. Really good points you make there. Noting the time, we are getting close to the end of our scheduled allotted time. So I'll close out with a final question to all three of you. And I'm looking for one pearl of wisdom. What can an organisation do to support, immediate change they can make to support a speak up culture? So perhaps Leanne, if you'd like to start.
I'm happy to do that very quickly, is have the conversation with your employees and ask them what it is they think is going to be important for psychological safety and speak up culture.
Emily?
My pearl is quite similar to Leanne's and Graham's last message, which was, I think it's actually, you have to be willing to listen. That's the change, to listen, to be challenged, to feel uncomfortable, and go into it with that curiosity to understand where people are coming from and allow people to drive that process.
Terrific, thanks. And Graham?
Probably just to try and select something different. Genuinely, authentically orientate your systems and your processes towards a disclosure-focused approach. Put the disclosure at the centre. Walk in their shoes and genuinely reorientate systems, policies, processes with that in mind. And that goes to things such as, multiple avenues for disclosing, confidentiality, all those aspects that would go with a disclosure-focused approach.
Fantastic. Thank you, Graham. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today, so I will wrap it up. But firstly, I'd like to thank Emily, Graham and Leanne and all the attendees and organisers for your contribution to the forum today. For me, the strongest theme of all, which is not unusual, is that leadership component, setting the tone and having a focus on the important integrity issue within the organisation. Just before I wrap it up, I would like to mention that we'll send the links to the resources mentioned throughout this session, as well as the slides and recording of today's webinar. So keep an eye out for that in your inboxes. Also, I'll point you towards the IBAC website, where there's a range of publications and resources, and also point you towards our social media channels where we disseminate a large volume of information. And finally, as this webinar comes to an end, you'll see in the chat a link to complete a short feedback survey, and that helps us plan our future events and see what topic is important to you as our very important stakeholders. So we'd appreciate if you could complete that and provide us that sort of feedback. We look forward to seeing you again at future IBAC events, and thank you very much for your attendance. Bye for now.